Well, some dramatic video captured during the tragic absurdity of the American housing crisis. New homes in Victorville, California being demolished in the spring of '09 because no one wanted to live in them. Victorville now a symbol of the devastating effects of the real estate crash, a story that was first brought to our attention by our friends at exiledonline.com. The housing crisis continuing to remake our country, with 2011 expected to see a new record number of foreclosures. And this week, the Dylan Ratigan Show, along with the Huffington Post, are launching a new series we're calling No Way to Live. And we start today with how it all began.
The current crisis has its roots in the Great Depression, the last time housing prices collapsed and foreclosures littered the landscape. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, under the New Deal, cleaned up the foreclosure mess. He then created Fannie Mae and the Federal Housing Administration to provide a stable mortgage system. The 30-year fixed mortgage was born. After World War II, veterans got incentives to buy homes backed by the tax code, the government, and a new highway system. America became the land of the white picket fence. During the next 60 years, owning a home became the best way to build wealth, and as a result, property taxes became the basis for funding cities and states. However, over time, the system began to fall apart. In 1968, Fannie Mae was turned over to private shareholders and became ultimately a slush fund for politicians serving on its board. Deregulation set in the late 1970s. The government lifted nearly all rules against predatory lending, and the mortgage-backed securities market exploded. It unleashed savvy New York bankers on unwitting American pension managers trying to keep up with free-spending state governors. It was the Wild West on Wall Street. By '04, banks no longer cared if borrowers were paid back because the credit risk had become the state pension manager's problem. The housing boom was the result, and so was the collapse.
And joining us now, Ryan McCachran, the mayor of Victorville, California. And Mr. Mayor, I understand things are substantially better now, by the way, than they were at the nadir of this crisis. But give us a sense of what your town has been through the past 2 to 3 years.
Well, we basically have been through a lot of foreclosures. A lot of that's had to do with people losing their jobs here locally. Our unemployment has been upwards of 15-16%, and some in the industry will even tell you that it's 1.5 times that. But we've seen that unemployment go down 0.1% at the end of December of 2010. So good news is on the horizon. But yeah, we've been through a difficult time with all the unemployment, long-term unemployment, which has caused a lot of foreclosures here in our community.
Are these numbers correct? 40% price declines between the fall of '08 and the fall of '09. 87% of the home sales were foreclosed homes?
Yeah, without a doubt. Our property values have dropped at least that amount, 30 to 40%. And a lot of people have decided that it's just not worth it to stay in their homes, and they've moved on. A lot of people still living in our community, just choosing to move on, rent a home, or do whatever else they can. Because for whatever reason, the loan modification program the federal government put together has not worked.
You elaborate on that last statement?
Well, basically, I mean, it's taking anywhere from 12 to 24 months to go through a loan modification. And in many cases, homeowners are just getting frustrated with this program the federal government's put together, and it's not working. It's not. There are no success stories. If there are, there are very few out there, and so folks are getting frustrated with, the federal government wants to help you, but they're not doing anything to help, and they really need to be doing more.
When you add what you just described, and we're going to talk about the mortgage modification problem in tomorrow's segment, when you look at the housing finance system, taking state pension money and hedge fund money, leveraging it up, and then using it to basically create home loans that are then pushed either into those pensions or into Fannie and Freddie. How much did that system lead to the sort of the freewheeling money that spiked the home prices in your town as much as they did in the first place?
Well, it had a huge impact. You have people that could, in essence, enter into loans for which they would never have normally qualified. And although, from a standpoint of getting people into homes, that might be a good thing, it's a bad thing from the standpoint of they could never meet the obligation. And so you had $300,000-$400,000 homes here in the Victor Valley, when in reality they probably should have been around $200,000. People, doing signature-only loans, income statements that, they're making this amount of money, but there's no verification of that process. And a lot of that was forced by the federal government. Loan to these folks so that they can get into homes and have the American dream. And as much as we all want to have the American dream, there is a responsibility on government to make sure that if you're going to push that, that you regulate it in such a way that it doesn't cause such a crisis as we're in today.
Yeah, at the same time, obviously, countrywide in the private sector banking institutions that were making billions of dollars for themselves, lending that money while keeping absolutely none of the loan risk. Your opinion on a housing finance system that pays people to make loans with money they don't have and don't have to worry about later?
Well, without a doubt. I mean, if you can make a loan, make all this money off of it, but release yourself of the obligation, it becomes a huge problem. And that obligation now sits with the federal government. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and what the federal government has basically pushed upon them, and now their obligation to, in some way, secure these loans that have been made. It's a real mess, and it needs to be cleaned up. So as our economy starts to grow again, as we start to see more home building, as we start to see folks need to have mortgages and home loans again, that we don't enter into this place again some 10 years down the road. This is something that we have to avoid for the future, and the federal government has a responsibility to make sure that they clean up this mess now so that it doesn't ever happen again.
At the same time, they've just passed a banking law that leaves the giant banks intact and does very little to change the structure.
Yeah, very frustrating, because we all sit out here, we all know that this problem exists. I assume that they know, but apparently it doesn't matter to them, and that's what we need to make sure that we're sending the message to Washington that it does matter to us, it should matter to them, and they need to correct the problem that they created.
Yeah, listen, if only they weren't taking so much money from the banks, perhaps they would have a clearer view. Mayor McCachran, thank you so much for your time this afternoon as we look at the collaboration between the federal government and the private banking system to profit, collect political donations, and enjoy themselves by driving money into housing. We also look at the consequences. And tomorrow we'll be hitting a different angle of the housing crisis with our week-long series, No Way to Live. Log on to DylanRatigan.com tonight for a podcast with one of the heroes in our Congress fighting the banks, Representative Brad Miller. And then tomorrow on the front page of the Huffington Post, or I should say on the impact section of the Huffington Post, check out their reporting on the Treasury Department's response to the crisis, the failed mortgage modification program known as HAMP. That tomorrow morning on the Huffington Post.